They're on the front lines of America's toughest missions. Top choppers. These are the heroes and workhorses on today's battlefields.
All of us carried about 600 or 700 rounds of 30 millimeter. So we were pretty well armed.
Meet a sleek fighter and a high-flying medic.
It is the coolest aircraft out there for this particular mission.
Ride along in a real-life transformer and a mighty power lifter.
The Chinook was 100% the best aircraft for the job.
They have the brains and the brawn to defend, defeat, and destroy. These are air warriors that always rise to the challenge. January 1991, northern Saudi Arabia. American pilots prepare to attack Iraq. Their aircraft, the AH-64 Apache. It's an advanced attack helicopter, custom built for combat. Inside, there's only room for two, a pilot and co-pilot or gunner. Outside, its crowning glory is its weaponry.
We're here today with the AH-64 Delta attack helicopters, the Army's premier attack platform. The weapon system the aircraft is most known for is a 30 millimeter cannon, which is slung underneath. It's a machine gun, essentially shoots cannon rounds, up to about 650 rounds per minute. When you shoot that gun, all the deck plates on the belly of the aircraft vibrate and rattle. It moves all of your organs inside you. It vibrates your HDU in your eye. It vibrates your retinas. You can feel it in your teeth. It's absolutely crazy.
And that's just part of the Apache's arsenal.
You can see installed on the aircraft, on the outboard side, you have a rocket launcher tube. You have a Hellfire missile launcher rack. All of these can be configured and tailored specifically for the mission that the aircraft's going on.
In Saudi Arabia, the Apache's mission: spearhead the Gulf War.
Each Apache had 8 Hellfire on its outboard wings, and then we had 19 shots of rocket. And I think all of us carried about 600 or 700 rounds of 30 millimeter. So we were pretty well armed.
Army General Richard Cody was there, leading the 101st Airborne on the top secret mission.
It was like an orchestra being synchronized, getting all the different elements.
Tension had been building for months with Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. His army had invaded neighboring Kuwait, violating UN resolutions and threatening the global oil market.
Withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
The U.S. joins forces with 40 other nations for Operation Desert Storm. Phase 1, destroy Saddam's key air defenses. That's where Cody comes in.
The special operations guys came up and said, you know, there's 3 radar sites. If we can take them out, that'll give us an edge to start the air campaign.
Cody will lead 8 Apaches on a midnight flight to destroy the towers. If his squadron succeeds, hundreds of Allied bombers can move in.
They wanted to create a corridor, if you will, so the F-17s and the F-16s and F-15s and Tornadoes and all the other coalition aircraft could fly through this corridor.
But the Apaches face an uphill battle. They need to fly undetected at night for 200 miles. That means no radio contact or navigational lights. The chances of crashing or getting shot down are high.
The estimates were we'd probably get 1 or 2 aircraft shot down. I mean, basically, you're flying a helicopter against a system designed to shoot down aircraft.
The 101st will be flying under the radar, literally just 50 feet off the ground. The low altitude brings even more dangers.
And so just the flight in there, flying in formation, in trail, for that long a period of time, we looked at what happens if somebody hits a sand dune. What happens if we have an engine failure? What happens if somebody takes a shot at one of the aircraft?
The Apaches fly in silence for 2 agonizing hours. Then, in the darkness, Cody spots the targets. It's time for the Apache's ultimate weapon, the Hellfire. The name says it all. The state-of-the-art missile was developed specifically for the Apache. Each helicopter can carry 16 missiles.
Probably the single most important contribution of the Apache program is the Hellfire missile itself.
Roger Connor is a curator at the National Air and Space Museum.
One of the reasons that the Hellfire is such an important weapon for the modern battlefield is that it's immensely accurate, but it also is not hugely destructive. It can take out an armored vehicle, but it's not going to take out entire buildings. And for that reason, it has proved very effective in the complex operational environments of Iraq and Afghanistan.
The concept for the Hellfire came out of the Cold War. The U.S. developed it to blast Soviet tanks. Unlike previous missiles, the Hellfire is laser-guided, a game changer. A pilot can pinpoint a target and hit it with stunning accuracy.
The ability to see targets a long way off, select them, and then hit them with a precision strike capability like the Hellfire has made the Apache a devastating battlefield weapon.
In Iraq, the Apaches can easily take out Saddam's radar towers, if they can reach them. General Cody's squadron is deep in enemy territory. Suddenly, the towers are in sight. The Apaches home in.
When we pulled the trigger, all 4 aircraft shot at the same time.
This is actual footage from Cody's mission.
You got 4 to 6 Hellfires en route. The time of flight's about 12 seconds. And then all of a sudden they start hitting. And when they start hitting, things start exploding pretty quickly, especially when we hit where the generators and all the fuel was.
Okay, go to Flechettes right here. Do it.
At about 4 kilometers, we started opening up with the rockets that had the Flechette rounds, and that was to take out the air defense guns that were out in front. And then as we get closer, we'd open up with the 30 millimeter and finish off the job.
Total destruction in 4 minutes flat.
We put in excess of about 40 Hellfire missiles on the target, a couple hundred Flechette rockets and a lot of 30 millimeter, and then broke and flew low level back.
The Apaches secure 20 miles of vital airspace. And the Gulf War can begin.
About 5 minutes into the flight back, we could see the jets coming in right over our head. And that's how the air war started.
Hundreds of coalition aircraft descend on Baghdad with remarkable success.
No aircraft got shot down through that corridor or into Baghdad that night.
The Apache kicks off America's first major conflict in a generation.
The Apache was the only one that had the precision firepower, the durability in terms of survivability to get in there and do this job.
What follows is the biggest air campaign since Vietnam. 18,000 air deployment missions. Apaches are front and center, taking out 500 enemy tanks, along with personnel carriers and other vehicles. Iraqi soldiers call the Apache the Black Death, and they surrender in droves.
10 hours into this ground offensive, more than 5,500 prisoners have been captured. And we received reports of many hundreds more north of our positions with white surrender flags.
After just 42 days, the Allies declare victory, and the Apache goes down in history as a premier war machine.
But it proved to everybody that it is a great helicopter, and still is. It's still the best attack helicopter in the world, bar none.
The Apache is the Army's top gunship, lean and mean. But in the heat of battle, troops need more than missiles. They also need medics. Enter the UH-60 Blackhawk, the top rescue helicopter in the military's arsenal. It's big, able to carry a payload of 12 soldiers. Inside, it's fully outfitted to save lives. U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Julius Stalker is a decorated flight medic.
This helicopter that we have right here is our medevac helicopter. It's an HH-60. It's specifically designed for medevac missions.
It has room for 6 stretchers and 2 crew members, plus life-saving equipment, all in a cabin of 88 square feet.
So even with our space constraints, I am able to provide care just like almost any emergency room would. I can defibrillate, I have a ventilator, I can maintain an airway with an ET tube. So essentially pretty much anything that they do in a trauma ward, I can accomplish on the back of my helicopter.
And Stalker will have to push the Blackhawk to its limits in the war on terrorism. June 2011, northern Afghanistan. The U.S. prepares for an offensive push against the Taliban in a region soldiers call the Valley of Death. 100 Americans have already died here.
It was a very active insurgent area, especially with it being near the border of Pakistan. It was a very easy place for them to hide out and operate because of the terrain.
Staff Sergeant Julia Stalker and her medic team prepare for Operation Hammer Down. They're expecting the worst.
We were going to be very, very busy.
In the mountains, platoons move in, but the enemy stops them cold.
We got disrupted. We've set up a defensive position, and we've just been in the defense.
Near one village, a platoon becomes trapped and tries to evacuate. But a soldier is hit and bleeding out. Field commanders call for the Blackhawks. They were designed specifically for these kinds of missions. The Black Hawk debuted in 1979 after the Vietnam War. That conflict brought helicopters to the forefront of modern warfare. They were the only way to get around.
Because there was so little infrastructure in Vietnam, almost no roads in the countryside, no railroads to speak of, this meant that all supplies had to be moved over very dense jungle, and to be able to do that, the helicopter was the only platform that was available to do that.
The helicopter troops rely on most is the HU-1 Iroquois, aka the Huey. The Army uses thousands of Hueys to move and resupply troops. It's also their go-to rescue helicopter.
The Huey had a number of advantages going for it. It was a simple aircraft, and most importantly, it was cheap and easy to build.
Problem is, the Huey has major drawbacks as well. It struggles in certain weather.
Vietnam was an extremely difficult environment for helicopters. Temperatures were very high. The humidity was often over 95%. To operate in those conditions really required an engine that was going to generate a lot of excess thrust to carry it through that difficult environment.
The Huey isn't strong enough or big enough to carry large payloads.
One of the weaknesses of the Huey was that it didn't have enough payload to be able to accommodate a complete 11-man infantry squad at one time. This meant that you had to have 2 helicopters carrying the squad divided up. If one of these aircraft was shot down or damaged, you lost half your squad.
And the helicopter is vulnerable.
It was fairly easy to shoot through the bottom of the aircraft. There was nothing to stop rounds coming up through the floor.
Of the 5,000 Hueys serving in Vietnam, half are shot down.
The limitations of the Huey forced the Army to issue new requirements, ones that would deal with the shortcomings in survivability, with the shortcomings in cabin space and in payload, and in speed and in range.
January 1972, the Pentagon. The Army announces plans to replace the Huey. They want an air ambulance on steroids. It needs to fly long distances, lift heavy cargo, and carry 11 or more fully equipped soldiers. And it has to be tough enough to take on enemy fire. The aviation company Sikorsky is chosen to build a helicopter called the Black Hawk. Sikorsky rigorously tests each individual component of the new aircraft. They develop a powerful rotor for speed and lift. Engineers blast the frame with bullets and strain parts to their breaking points. The strategy works. This is a crash test of a Huey, the aircraft the military is replacing. And this one is for the new Black Hawk, also hitting tail first. The Army has a winner. Sikorsky delivers the first Black Hawks in October 1978, opening a new chapter in aerial warfare.
The Black Hawk was the first helicopter to give the Army really what they wanted in terms of air assault. It was powerful, it could carry a full squad, it was survivable, it had significant range, had good speed, and performed very well on the battlefield.
3 decades after the Black Hawk debuted, it's on a rescue mission in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Stalker and her crew race to help a wounded soldier. Outside a remote village, a platoon is under fire.
There was small arms fire, RPGs. It was a very, very active battlefield. It's a vision in my mind that will never go away.
Stalker's team desperately wants to land, but they can't risk getting shot down. They make a gut-wrenching decision. To reach the soldiers, they'll have to wait for backup. The Black Hawk pulls up to 11,000 feet out of firing range to wait for U.S. bombers. For Stalker, it's agonizing.
So we had to wait. We burned fuel and we waited for that call that we were going to be able to get in and pull our patients out.
For most helicopters, a hover at this height would be impossible. At high altitudes, the air is thinner, and the aircraft's engine has to work harder to stay afloat. Most helos don't have that power, but the Black Hawk does. 2 GE turboshaft engines crank out more than 1,800 horsepower each. The engines spin 4 blades, which stretch 54 feet in diameter. This combined power keeps the Black Hawk flying even at dizzying heights. Stalker is secure in the air, but she wants to be on the ground tending to the wounded.
All we needed was about 2 minutes. We needed 2 minutes of it being quiet.
Things go from bad to worse. It gets dark. Even with night vision, it's nearly impossible to see.
It made it difficult because all I can see is what I can see down a green little toilet paper tube. If you picture putting a toilet paper tube in front of your face and then having just seen green and black, That's how we operate at nighttime.
Then, out of the darkness, American bombers. The explosions give Stalker's Black Hawk exactly what it needs: cover. They don't risk landing, instead hovering just long enough to load the gravely wounded soldier. Once he's safely on board, they take off, racing to stop his bleeding. Ultimately, he survives, thanks to the Black Hawk.
It is the coolest aircraft out there for this particular mission.
In the end, Stalker and her crew rescue 14 soldiers over 3 perilous days. Each time, they risk their own lives to save others.
It's pretty hard to feel successful in a battlefield environment because there's always the tragedy of it. There's always lives lost. No matter what good outcomes, there's always bad outcomes in an operation like that. I wish I'd gotten to every patient. We all do. But I feel for the most part we had been successful.
Since it debuted in 1978, the Black Hawk has served in nearly every U.S. conflict. Different versions are used by all 4 military branches and the Coast Guard.
Other U.S. services, particularly the United States Navy and the Coast Guard, have benefited very significantly from its application.
Today, the Black Hawk continues to evolve. It can now refuel mid-flight, a rarity in the world of helicopters. Some Black Hawks are even capable of advanced aerial assault. This air warrior shows no signs of stopping.
The Black Hawk has indisputably proved itself as an important asset for the U.S. military.
The Black Hawk is swift and specialized. But sometimes troops need something else on the battlefield: brute strength. That's when they turn to their power lifter, the CH-47 Chinook. This aircraft is massive, able to carry 50 troops. And it's powerful, with tandem rotors 60 feet in diameter. But one of its coolest features is on the outside: heavyweight hooks to carry things that won't fit within. It's called sling loading. Pallets, shipping containers, Humvees. The Chinook can even haul a 3.5-ton howitzer at speeds of 100 miles an hour. All that power will be paramount for a mission no one expects. December 1995, northern Bosnia. A 3-year war here has ended, but the area remains volatile. NATO sends in a massive peacekeeping force, including 60,000 U.S. troops. Americans plan to enter from Croatia by building a pontoon bridge over the Sava River.
At the time, there was no bridge that actually led into Bosnia. So the military decided to build a bridge over the river.
Troops don't know it yet, but they'll be relying on the mighty Chinook and flight engineers like Sergeant Michael Brookins.
It is imperative to get this bridge completed as soon as possible.
Just before Christmas, the Army hauls in troops, heavy equipment, and hundreds of bridge segments. But their biggest obstacle becomes the river itself.
Overnight, the river overflowed its banks and actually wiped out the base camp that the engineers had set up.
The entire operation comes to a standstill.
The engineering group was in total panic. You could see vehicles like 2.5-ton trucks half submerged, but you can't move them because the ground at that point is too soft.
If U.S. troops can't cross the river, peacekeeping efforts in Bosnia could collapse. With Army trucks spinning their wheels, generals call for heavyweights.
They realized that wheeled vehicles wouldn't be the option to actually get the bridge sections in the water, so they brought in Chinooks.
The Chinook is a power lifter by design. Its muscle comes in part from its trademark tandem rotors. Traditionally, helicopters rely on two different sized rotors. On top, a large rotor generates lift. But that motion causes a rotational force called torque. Left unchecked, torque would make the aircraft body spin. That's why most helicopters have a tail rotor. It provides a stabilizing counterforce. But all that rotation eats up a lot of power. Chinooks have two equal rotors on top. They also spin in opposite directions, neutralizing torque, but without wasting any energy. All its power goes into lift and maneuverability.
The Chinook is the fastest helicopter in the U.S. military inventory. It's also very maneuverable, and that is due to its tandem rotor design. The tandem rotor allows us to direct that in whatever mode we'd like to do, whether it's the power to hover, the speed, or maneuverability.
Two rotors plus two turboshaft engines equals major muscle.
We have two of these engines generating over 5,000 horsepower apiece. These are the most powerful engines on any U.S. military helicopter.
The Chinook can carry up to 25 tons. Its motto, you call, we haul. Near Bosnia, Army Chinooks take off to help troops stymied by floodwaters. They reach the Sava River, where nearly 100 segments of a pontoon bridge wait to be assembled.
The setup was literally we were going to pick up the bridge from these pickup zones and fly them to the drop point in the river.
Brookins and his crew approach their first segment. Below, soldiers brace themselves to hook up the heavy load. But the Chinook creates more downwash than any other helicopter. It's like standing in a Category 4 hurricane on a sheet of ice.
Because there was so much ice saturation on top of the bridge sections, just from the normal rotor wash we generate, we were blowing people off the top of these bridge sections. After seeing a couple of hookup personnel fall, we realized we couldn't continue that.
Brookins and his crew quickly come up with a plan B.
We kind of basically told the people on the ground to just set the slings up on top of the load. We would pick them up because it was so dangerous due to all the ice.
Now Brookins will try to hook up the bridge piece from inside the Chinook through an opening called the hell hole.
We have a pole inside the aircraft we call a shepherd's hook that the crew member in the back of the aircraft would reach down and just simply grab the clevis and hoist it up to the aircraft themselves.
The plan works. Now it's time to deliver. Easier said than done.
The worst thing could happen is engine failure. Worse yet, dual engine failure. It's even worse when you're connected to an object. As the flight engineer, you're constantly inspecting the load as you're coming up. You're also monitoring the hook that you're connected to, because if it's not on correctly or if it's twisted, it'll complicate things.
The Chinook needs to carry the 12,000-pound piece to waiting boats. So it has to fly dangerously low, just over the tree line. The Chinook hovers. Then Brookins gives the cue to drop. One segment down, 100 to go. Construction takes 72 straight hours, but the Chinook gets it done. On New Year's Eve, nearly 20,000 American troops enter Bosnia, bringing NATO forces critical manpower and supplies. In Bosnia and around the world, the Chinook has been the muscle behind hundreds of missions. It's served in nearly every climate and circumstance since it debuted during the Cold War. The Chinook was designed in the 1950s to airlift nuclear weapons. The Hilo later became a mainstay in Vietnam, where troops relied on it for transport and resupply missions.
The Chinook has changed very little cosmetically over its lifespan. It's certainly not the most glamorous helicopter in the inventory, but it is the one aircraft that you know is going to get the goods there when you need them.
The helicopter's rear-loading ramp has always given it an edge.
The CH-47 is a rear-loading aircraft, and that's a big advantage to us because we can unload personnel, packs, cargo, and internally even load a Humvee faster than the Black Hawk can load their 5 personnel.
The Chinook can even load and unload in the water.
One of the interesting features of the Chinook is that it's semi-amphibious. This means that for special operations, for instance, they can actually park the back end of the helicopter in the water, lower the ramp, and actually have a special operations team drive the boat into the aircraft while it's sitting there in the water and take off.
Inside its cargo hold, the Chinook has 228 square feet to pack in soldiers or supplies. That's more than any other helicopter in the U.S. military.
Our cabin area is over 30 feet long. We can load over 15,000 pounds. If we need more space, we can level out the ramp and add more cargo there, and we can fly with the ramp level.
The Chinook is big, powerful, and versatile. It will need all that and more in the War on Terror. July 2010, Eastern Afghanistan. U.S. troops are patrolling the border with Pakistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. Their goal? Prevent the Taliban from gaining ground.
The tagline my battalion commander used consistently was, "There are no routine missions in Paktika province."
Captain Brian Lutz was there, serving as a Chinook pilot.
Our guys were moving out into the mountains to try and catch foreign fighters, find some of their supply, like arms and armament, before it got distributed out to local Taliban fighters.
U.S. troops spend weeks camped out in the remote mountains. Chinooks are their lifelines. Lutz and his crew are preparing for a regular mission when they get an urgent message.
We got a call letting us know that there was a unit that had been in and out of contact throughout the day that needed an emergency resupply.
30 miles away, a platoon is fighting the enemy at the top of a mountain ridge. The troops are at 8,000 feet and nearly out of ammo.
If they don't have sufficient ammunition to engage the enemy, the last couple days that they spent out there chasing after these guys are going to be for nothing.
Lutz's crew quickly loads the Chinook with cargo called speedballs.
speedballs. It's a fancy term for a body bag full of water, ammo, and food. It's kind of macabre because it's a body bag, but it's something where you can zip it up, it's waterproof, and you can toss it out of the back of an aircraft relatively quickly.
The most important cargo on the Chinook is drinking water.
Water is absolutely crucial, you know, particularly with all the gear that they're carrying and at altitude. You know, without something like that, I mean, they're absolutely not going to be able to continue.
Locked and loaded, the Chinook lifts off and heads toward the firefight. Every minute matters for the ground forces.
They'd be moving through the area and someone would start shooting at them, and then as soon as they'd start to engage, whoever it was would kind of scatter. And then, you know, randomly they just start, you know, getting hit from another spot. So they consistently were taking contact.
Lutz and his crew are flying into dangerous territory in a helicopter with a major vulnerability. The right shot could hit one of its massive rotors, taking down the entire aircraft.
You can't put armor on rotor blades, it just doesn't work. You've got some basic armor plating in the aircraft under some of the cruise stations, but that's pretty much it.
The Chinook is often the go-to bird for the military's riskiest missions. But the massive chopper is also a common target. In Afghanistan, the war's single greatest loss of life was in a Chinook. 38 soldiers died. The 10-minute flight to the combat zone is tense.
There's a lot of mountains that kind of funnel into this larger valley, and there's a bunch of these spurs that kind of shoot off of that and that are very steep ridge lines. So there's nowhere really that you could put a full aircraft and be able to just land it and set it down.
Lutz studies a mountain ridge that drops sharply on each side. The summit is less than 5 feet wide.
Chinook's a big aircraft. First thought was, yeah, we're not gonna be able to land there. Not even put the rear two wheels down.
But turning back isn't an option. American lives depend on the Chinook's supplies.
The flight engineer immediately piped up with, I think we can just put the ramp on the top of the ridgeline and we can offload from there.
It's a daring solution. To make it work, Lutz must maintain a steady hover just 100 feet above the narrow ridge. It's called a pinnacle landing, and it requires nerves of steel.
Aircraft and the environment are kind of inherently a little bit unstable. Up in the mountains like that, there's a lot of like wind currents. So if you catch a particularly strong gust and those rotor blades are moving pretty fast, so if they clip something, it's probably going to bring the aircraft down.
Lutz is in hostile territory. And the enemy is onto him. Despite Taliban gunfire, Lutz moves in. If he times it right, he can get ground troops what they need.
Was trying to stay as light on the controls as possible so that I didn't make any sudden or drastic movements while we were, you know, trying to set the ramp right on this narrow ridgeline.
Lutz focuses on his displays and hovers over the landing spot. The gunner watches for more enemy fire.
That's probably the most dangerous portion of the mission. You're trying to maintain your position, and you're most vulnerable as you're just kind of sitting there hovering.
The ramp touches down. And the crew quickly unloads. Less than a minute later, the Chinook takes off, leaving 1,000 pounds of supplies.
Given the nature of the resupply and the fact that it was at altitude where you may have very limited space to drop off, the Chinook was 100% the best aircraft for the job.
Lutz's Chinook is among 1,200 that fly for the armed forces today. And they will keep flying for decades to come.
50 years on, there's still no replacement for the Chinook in the pipeline. This may be the first aircraft that sees a century in service.
The Chinook is classic old school, but the military is also going new school with the V-22 Osprey. This state-of-the-art aircraft can change from a plane to a helicopter with the push of a button. And the Osprey will need the best of both modes for a daring mission in a desperate country. November 2013, Okinawa, Japan. Marine Corps pilots prepare for an emergency mission in the military's most innovative aircraft, the V-22 Osprey. This is a real-life transformer thanks to twin rotors that tilt. When they're up, the aircraft flies like a helicopter, but shift them down and it's a plane. The Osprey debuted in 2007 to give the military the flying range of a plane with the landing and cargo capability of a helicopter. For a pilot, the Osprey offers the best of both worlds.
Tiltrotor aircraft gives us tremendous capabilities that an airplane has as far as speed and range. Uniquely, we can land in a hover just like a helicopter could. So we can land in a lot of places that an airplane can't land.
In Okinawa, Captain Casey Nelson is in an Osprey squadron heading to a disaster zone. 900 miles away, the Philippines has been hit with the most devastating storm in its history. Typhoon Haiyan was bigger than Hurricane Katrina and deadlier.
So it's a 15 to 25-foot wave came across entire villages, and so everything's wiped out.
6,300 people have been killed. Millions are homeless and hungry. Food and medicine are pouring in from around the world, but the supplies are overwhelming the Philippine Army.
Day after day, they kept bringing more and more cargo, and they just kept stacking it up on the tarmac right beside the other aid and supplies.
Filipino forces don't have the air power to reach everyone in need.
The Philippine Army were utilizing older model Hueys, and they didn't have the range to get out to some of the more isolated areas.
The island nation turns to the United States Marines. Before dawn, Captain Nelson and 12 Ospreys prepare for takeoff. They start in helicopter mode. Thanks to parts called rotating nacelles.
How the nacelles help us to take off vertically is they place the rotor head in an upward fashion to direct the thrust down into the ground.
With the nacelles at 90 degrees, the Osprey can take off and land just as a helicopter would. In the air, pilots shift the nacelles, and the aircraft becomes a high-speed turboprop plane.
What allows the nacelles to move is the hydraulic power drive unit and the ball and jack assembly, which you can see up here just to the inside of the nacelle where it joins the wing root.
The hydraulic drive connects the nacelle engines through a shaft in the Osprey's wings. It rotates the nacelles forward or back, transforming the Osprey in just 12 seconds. Pilots pull off the complex nacelle shift with the press of a button.
On this thrust control lever, this gray wheel that my left thumb sits on is what moves the nacelles. This right here is our hottest commodity to a pilot in the V-22 community, or in the Osprey community, your left thumb, because without it, you cannot fly this aircraft.
In Southeast Asia, the Osprey Squadron is halfway to the Philippines. The aircraft has a range of 450 miles, far more than any helicopter. But this flight is 900 miles long. Luckily, the Osprey has another feature most helicopters don't: the ability to refuel mid-flight. A C-130 stands by to assist Nelson's squadron.
We have what's called a refuel area commander, and that'll be a C-130 pilot, and he has a special qualification and a special skill.
Even for seasoned pilots, this is a difficult and dangerous maneuver. Everything has to line up perfectly at 230 miles an hour. The Osprey's twin rotors pose a constant threat. 38-foot blades spinning at 333 revolutions per minute. A C-130 crew extends a fuel hose, and an Osprey moves in.
You're definitely concerned about potential hazards. Worst case scenario, prop rotor blade contacting the C-130.
They have to get within 15 feet of each other. The crews hold their breath, then connect flawlessly. After a 4-hour flight, the 12 fully loaded Ospreys arrive in the Philippines. Nelson's assignment: deliver their aid to a remote village 360 miles south of Manila.
The very first day operation I flew down to the most affected areas was pretty surreal. It doesn't even seem like it's a reality, what you're seeing. It seems like something that you might see on TV or from a movie, and it's kind of hard for your brain to compute that this is really happening in front of you.
Nelson and his crew scan the devastation, looking for a safe place to land.
And you're really flying an aircraft into an area that basically is completely flattened. We didn't know whether we were actually going to be able to get in there.
Amid the destruction, Nelson sees a possible landing spot.
There was this small little clearing of palm trees, basically. They'd all been kind of leveled away, and there was enough room for us to just kind of land directly straight down into the trees.
The approach wouldn't be possible in a plane, but it is in an Osprey. Nelson shifts to helicopter mode. As they land, the Marines look for survivors, unsure of what to expect. The crew carefully approaches. Then, out of nowhere, a rush of people.
You get to a certain point in the days where people stop being hungry and thirsty and they start getting desperate.
The Osprey's rotors are still spinning.
We're concerned with people getting too close to the aircraft because it is a dangerous environment to be around.
But the villagers are starving. Supplies go quickly. Another aircraft might be overwhelmed, but not the Osprey. It delivers the supplies and lifts off safely.
Being a part of this mission was a huge privilege for me. I'd been waiting a long time, really, to be able to help people. You know, that's why a lot of guys become Marines. You want to help people that can't help themselves, defend people that can't defend themselves.
In the Philippines, Ospreys ferry tons of aid in record time, reaching even the most remote areas. Since it debuted in 2007, the Osprey has seen more than 400,000 flight hours. And it has the lowest mishap rate of any Marine aircraft. In 2013, it joined HMX-1, the helicopter squadron that transports White House VIPs. Ospreys now regularly escort the president's helicopter, Marine One. No matter where they fly, these 4 air warriors get the job done. The high-tech Osprey and the deadly Apache.
It proved to everybody that it is a great helicopter and still is. It's still the best attack helicopter in the world, bar none.
The swift Black Hawk and the steadfast Chinook
is the one aircraft that you know is going to get the goods there when you need them.
They work together to protect troops and save lives in really tight spots. Nimble, versatile, and powerful, they've earned the title of America's top choppers.